So some people say the next big disaster is going to be a comet, a pole shift, you know, a big cyber attack, a big EMP attack, something along those lines. But they're wrong. The real disaster is already in motion. You just can't see it. It happens when the grid flickers, your phone dies, and your instincts completely fail. This series isn't about fear. It's about decoding the part of your mind that decides whether you survive or panic. So urban survival is completely different because it really kind of magnifies both the genius and the frailty of humans. The higher the population density, the more you're going to see that frailty show up. Thin supply chains are the biggest problem. Total dependence on power is another one. So I was fortunate enough to live through the 2021 Texas freeze. Wasn't terrible, but had a lot of people pretty scared. The real problem, though, was the infrastructure in Texas. Number one, their power grid is significantly overburdened, and therefore when you hit a set of temperatures that your homes aren't really built to live long-term or longer periods through, they really struggle. So what they did was they decided we're going to ration the electricity to try to spread it out, right? So here we are, you know, below zero or right at zero temperatures in some cases, different parts even worse. Well, and not as bad further south, obviously. But you had about 15 to 30 minutes. Of course, they said you're going to have 30 minutes per hour of power at first. And ultimately, locations where you had a lot of old folks' homes and hospitals, things like that, where they had to keep the power on. They left those areas on all the time. So you might got lucky and been close to that grid section, and you're going to have power all the time. But I wasn't in there. I was kind of at an outlying area a little bit, still inside of a, you know, suburban type subdivision. And we had initially about 20 minutes per hour where we had power come on. And I had, you know, things out in the garage that were, you know, obviously going to freeze. And I had my water softener out there. So, you know, trying to insulate, put electrical heaters around some of the pipes that I felt were important, right? And so it would come on for 20 minutes at first, and then it got down to 15 or 10. I was lucky enough to live in a very new house. It was only a couple years old, and it had great insulation compared to some of the other homes. Those other homes didn't fare so well. So, you know, cracking your water to keep the water moving so it wouldn't freeze was some of the tricks that they did, right? And, you know, you learn from a situation like that what you thought you could live through or your house could live through, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes Mother Nature has a way of making that 500-year flood or 1,000-year flood just pop up out of nowhere. We've seen that as well. You can think back to the New York City 2023 or 2003 blackouts. There's tons of examples, but I think some of the biggest that exposed most recently is the pandemic itself. And it really exposed how our supply lines are pretty fragile, and how people or opinions can sometimes be inflated. What do I mean by that? Are you still living off of the toilet paper you bought back then? I bet you some people are. What do you bet? Right? So the misconception that this is the thing I need. And that's what I wanted to start this series for, because we really need to prioritize a number of different things. And that all starts with the spectrum of disaster. So what do I mean by spectrum of disaster? We're going to put things into categories here, buckets, whatever you want to call them. Common ones, uncommon ones, and then the extreme. So the common ones would be your blizzards, your blackouts, your floods, your heat waves, things like that. The uncommon ones might be like a cyber attack or a grid failure, maybe a solar flare that hits that's not huge. And then your extreme might be your EMP, a lot of people talking right now about polar shifts, comet impacts, another one, and then major solar flares, things like that. So what it tells us really is preparation isn't perfect. We have all these different categories and we're trying to say, well, what do we prepare for? Each of those might have a whole different level of preparation to put those together. And it really comes down to the math. And if you can put this in math and you can keep it logical, you can kind of prioritize things and put them in a list of probability. So you take probability times the actual impact. What's the overall impact that event would have on you? You multiply those together and you can kind of come up with the types of things that you need to put together for your thinking, where you think it's going to go. So right now we've got a comet, the Atlas comet. I think it's 31 or 3I, I don't know which. It's coming by fairly close to Earth, right? So we have a lot of people thinking about how that's going to impact it. We have a very low magnetic field protection right now, and the sun is having a high amount of solar activity as well. But when we look at this from a scientific standpoint and we try to take the emotion away from that, it's a fairly low risk. In other words, the Earth's not really been impacted by that type of event multiple times, and so therefore it's a fairly low risk. But events like that really do spark, ideas of that polar shift possibility. And so all of those fields, the theory of collapse, all those kinds of things, the geomagnetic reversal takes thousands of years based on the information and the actual facts that we have. A lot of people say, it could happen a weekend or, in just a few days. And that's really not what we have as far as evidence. There's a Dr. Phil Livermore out of the University of Leeds, in 2023 came out with a pretty big report about how that is just not really how this works. So it's important for us to balance the science and the myth to establish a really calm credibility. We don't want to do that. And so this series that I'm going to be doing is going to be taking a little bit of both, right? We need to talk about both spectrums of that fear so that we can kind of control that and make sure we don't let our minds run away with a certain level of fear that now overcomes our ability to think through a situation, because that's where the freezing comes from. When we get too panicky, we've spent all of our time thinking one direction, and we have not really prepared properly, right? If you're prepared properly, then that fear is subsided enough that you can keep your mind in the game. Your mind's the number one survival tool. So we can't do anything to affect our mind too much. So we'll get into shelter. We're going to get into some structural stuff with your home, obviously structural safety, insulation, radiation protection, all that kind of stuff. Is your home ready for a week without power? Water, energy, hydration. Are you really able to hydrate without heat with the grid? Can you keep your family warm and hydrate for 3 days, at least 3 days? Food, medical, that's the other category we're going to talk about. Short-term nutrition, urban first aid. Could you feed and treat your family if the road's closed tonight? We'll also get into a little bit of evacuation, because there's really two paths we can go by. We can survive in place or we can bug out, right? So there's two paths there, but there's a number of things that you should probably do regardless, and we'll get into those first. The important part about bugging out is knowing when to survive in place, when to stay, and when you have to go. In other words, when is bugging in smarter than bugging out? In these videos, I'm going to share my insights that turns into kind of a reality check for you, right? Because really, preparedness is just applied common sense. It really is. And more importantly, resilience is built prior. If your success really determines about your preparation, in other words. It's done before the event, not during. We'll talk a little bit about getting your community involved, Being involved with the right kind of people can really improve your odds significantly. And, some people say, well, it's a private club, or it's we don't want people to know about it situation. And there's a balance there for sure. I mean, you can't have people that you feel like are, morally not up to par for your group or sharing the same ideals. It's very important that you've got a balance as well. You got people that are trained in certain things that have stronger strengths in one area, and you look for those people to kind of balance that situation out. We'll discuss those things. But ultimately, readiness is going to calm you from the everyday potential all the way up to the cosmic event. It's going to at least give you some ideas and some comforts to know that you've got yourself and your family prepared to some degree, and your home. So the next episode that I'm going to do is really going to be your mental state, how to prepare yourself mentally, physically for an upcoming event. Get yourself ready. There's a lot more to it than you think. This isn't just like trying to overcome your fears. There's a number of things that you can do to prepare for that. So I hope you look forward to the next video. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it because it's something that I really haven't taught a lot on, even though, I've been doing wilderness survival stuff since the mid 90s. If you don't count my, time in scouting when I was a youth and all the way through, I went through scouting for many, many, many years. Even as an adult. So a lot of that was fun, living on the farm and doing those kinds of things as well. Have been a part of the history as far as what I would feel qualifies me to be able to talk about some of these things, but I've spent a lot of time and was raised in a religious household that ultimately talked a lot about the last days, right? And so I was kind of conditioned from the time I was young for all of these different things to be ready, to be prepared. And so I've got a lot in my head, and I'm trying to save this for my kids and grandkids. And ultimately, that's the main reason why I do these videos. So shout out to my kids for motivating me to do this. And I hope you'll come back and we'll learn some more together. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.